and welcome to another episode of Just Scare Us Already. I'm your host, Cheyenne, with my co host, Dave.
Hi, everyone.
And this is a podcast where we talk about horror movies, both old and new. We discuss our feelings about them, our ratings, as well as just different trends that we're noticing in the horror movie genre. So let's go ahead and get started on this discussion on American remakes of foreign movies.
All right. Yeah, great. So, with the recent release of the US remake of the Denmark Netherlands 2022 film Speak No Evil, we decided to take a look at some other US foreign horror film remakes and talk a little bit about some of our favorite remakes and some of our least favorites. Did any of these films scare us at all? We'll have to see. So, although there have been numerous US remakes of foreign films, the list of remade horror films is not as long as I would have thought it would be. But it does look like in the early 2000s, specifically 2001 through 2010, we were inundated with remakes of
Mhm.
Japanese and other Asian films. And that was likely due to the success of The Ring and The Grudge. So, Shy, let's talk about our top three worst remakes.
So this is our top three worst remakes out of the ones we were able to find. I will say there was a lot of foreign movies I wasn't able to find in our list, and then a few American remakes that I couldn't. Luckily, we saw a few of them. I remember when I was younger. So there's a few that I have off the top of my head, but just wanted to give that a warning. So if you think that there is one that we missed or something even worse, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments. But for me, my bottom number three on my list for worst remakes was The Echo, a 2008 remake of a Filipino film, Sigar. I should ask mom how to pronounce that. The Sigar, Sigar, from 2004. This movie I thought was in concept the same movie. They did the same movie concept wise really decently well. However, the way that they went about it was very different and in my opinion was very lackluster. The Filipino movie follows a man who moves into a very low income apartment and realizes that this apartment is haunted by the ghost of a woman and her daughter who were brutally abused and killed by their husbands. The Filipino one really follows both storylines really well. It kind of shows a character who was there during the murders and a character who's there during the present time and having to deal with the echo of this ghost. It switches back and forth in a way that at first was a little confusing, but later on, it really shows the full piece of the story of how no one helped this family through this really tough situation. Versus the American one, it fully focuses on the present day and these ghosts. It has the very cliche horror movie jump scares. It does not go into in depth as much as I would have liked about the abuse and about just how no one helped this family. So I thought that this movie was very lackluster. It again, it followed the general concept of it, but really heavily wanted to just do jump scares and ghost stories versus the storyline that the Filipino original followed. So that's
Okay.
my top of the worst. What about you?
Yeah, so for me, the number three would be The Grudge, which is the remake
Okay.
of the 2002 Japanese film Juno. I thought the film pretty much mirrored the original, and although the Japanese and the US version are both directed by the same director,
Mm-hmm.
Takashi Shimutsu, I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. I felt the US remake was slower and more disjointed than the original. It seemed like he was trying to do some things that he wasn't able to do or didn't think of when he did the original film.
Mm-hmm.
And the flashbacks throughout the film made it a little hard to understand or to tell what was going on. Was this a flashback or was this, happening in real time? So
Mm-hmm.
for me, The Grudge, although it was a major hit, I think a lot of folks after seeing The Ring, they were creeped out by the long hair, skinny woman, making the weird sounds. I think people were just creeped out by that, and I think that's why The Grudge was such a huge hit. But story
Hmm.
wise, didn't add anything new, and actually, I thought it was uh, worse than the original. So Grudge
Yeah,
would be my number three.
I agree with that. It was the first time I watched the Japanese version all the way through, I think, or I actually paid
Hmm.
attention to it. But yeah, I definitely think that that one was. I just realized, like, with American remakes of Asian movies, it feels like America does not give a care about the storyline nearly as much as Asian movies do.
Hmm.
There's just a less focus on the story that and building the story and the characters and all these different ghosts versus just like jump scare with a basic storyline.
Yeah, yeah. I think especially with Japanese films, there's a lot more within the story. I think that's how come a lot of the Japanese films are a lot slower and
Uh
can be a
huh.
little more boring, is because they hold different traditions, they hold different respects to, different things. So for them, it's more than just this, telling the story of a horror story, but it's also how it affects their family or how it disgraces their family, things like that. Where here in America, like you said, it was more let's get to the horror, let's get to the scares, so let's just gloss
Yeah.
over the story real quick, and then, oh, here's a monster.
And I just wanted to bring that up because it's not on my list, but I did want to give a shout out to a horrible movie, Apartment 1303. Production wise, bad acting, horrible script, terrible scares, really just negated the entire storyline of the original Japanese movie of the same name. This one did not make my list just because it was just so god awful. I could not even put it on the list. It did not even deserve a watch. But on my list at number two is We Are What We Are, or Somos Lo Que Hey, the original Spanish movie. This one, I honestly, I really like both movies, which is why it was really hard for me to put it on my worst list. But I
Hmm.
did because, in terms of remake, I don't feel like these movies are at all related. The only thing that makes these two movies similar at all is the fact that it follows a cannibalistic family.
Hmm.
The Spanish original version focuses heavily on the psychological aspects that this tradition or ritual takes on the children of this family, as the patriarchy of the family, who typically would find their food, has now passed away. It leaves it on the two oldest sons and their daughter to figure out who's going to continue the tradition, who's going to bring about this ritual that in some way is supposed to help the family to continue to thrive. And it really focuses heavily on the oldest son's new found responsibility of doing this, despite being more of a timid and quiet character who is also dealing with internal homosexual and homophobia, versus the remake We Are What We Are, which I genuinely did enjoy. I like this movie a lot. It follows two sisters and a younger son or younger brother, where their matriarchy has now passed away, and they are continuing this ritual of eating a person, I believe, once a year is how it was. So most of the year they're starving.
Hmm.
That's what it seemed like, at least. I don't know if I missed something. Um, and the effects that it's having on the two oldest daughters, who clearly do not want to be part of this tradition anymore and want to find a way to leave the family. They're both good movies on their own. I would say watch both of them if you get the chance. But in terms of remakes, they just aren't the same movie.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So my number,
What
my
about you?
number two, my number two is 2008's Quarantine, which is a remake of Record, or REC, which is the 2007 Spanish version. Oddly enough, when they released the trailer for Quarantine, right at the beginning it says from the producers who, I mean, when they released the trailer for Rec in America, the beginning of the trailer says from the producers of Quarantine. So
Oh,
yeah, so it wasn't released in the US, but after Quarantine came out, the producers went out and got the rights to the Spanish version and released that in American theaters the following year. So although one was made before the other, it was released in America after the remake. So for me, although both movies were pretty much the same, I thought the original Spanish film was done better. The whole found footage premise, it was something that was hot at that time. You know, you had the Blair Witch and Cloverfield, and films like that. So this whole found footage and the moving around with the camera aspect, it was done in both. However, for me, the remake, I think they did too much of it. If you
Hmm.
watch the Spanish version, there were scenes where they would actually stop the camera, and focus more on what was going on. Whereas the American version, is constantly moving around. So anybody who suffers from motion sickness, I'm pretty sure, wasn't feeling too well after watching it. But other than that, though, I just felt that the Spanish version, the lead character, I thought she was a wee bit stronger than the American lead
Hmm.
character, and I think the pace and the storytelling was done better in the original version as opposed to the U.S. version. I think the U.S. version was just trying to make a quick buck on a very successful film out in Spain.
Okay, I understand that.
So, what's your
Well,
number
going
one
to
worst?
my number one was Martyrs, the 2015 remake of the original 2008 French movie of the same name. Um, this one was definitely my least favorite because I felt the message was completely lost in the remake. The original Martyrs came out in 2008 and explored the transcendence of sufferers and the belief from a non religious radical group that there are chosen few who can let go of themselves to the point of seeing into the afterlife while still being alive. This movie was a bit slow paced, I'll give it that, but it had gruesome imagery and an interesting and depressing ending, which again, I've said this on a few episodes. I love a good sad ending. I love a good depressing ending, but in this case, it really did work for the film. The whole point of this movie is this transcendence of yourself, and it's following one girl who was tortured at a young age, who finally finds her torturers and decides to kill them, while all along bringing a friend who is clearly in love with her, but bringing her along for the ride, who does not believe this, does not believe that these are her torturers, believes that this girl is kind of just insane, and at the end is forced into the same position that her friend was. And I thought that it was just so, I don't know, it like really just got me. I was so shocked at the ending. I was shocked at how gruesome it went versus the American remake in 2015, which shot for shot the beginning of the movie. However, it quickly descends into a typical American flick. The women manage to find a gun, and it's all just a big shootout slash escape thing into a survivalist movie, which I just felt like didn't really work for this ending. Not to mention that this one focuses heavily on the religious aspect of martyrism or martyrdom, which the whole point of the original was that this isn't a religious thing. This is solely looking at the afterlife. This is a scientific mindset and a scientific group versus the remake is, again, just a religious group who believe in the godly afterlife. And I just felt like it fully mistook the ending of the original and focused heavily on the aspect of survival and escaping. And it was just too much of um, like a wannabe bad John Wick movie at the end. So sadly, this one was my least favorite. I really did like the original. If you ever get a chance to watch the French version, I think it's very much worth the watch. The American version sucks.
All right.
What about you? What
Well,
is your worst remake?
actually, my worst remake is on your list as well, and it's "We Are What We Are." Um, as you mentioned, these two films, "We Are What We Are" from 2013, and the Mexican film Somos lo que. I never took Spanish, so I'm not going to continue to butcher that name. But I agree. These two films had absolutely nothing to do with each other except for the fact of the family situation and the cannibalism. I felt the original Mexican film had a much better storyline. It dealt more with the family dynamic. And so it dealt more with, you know, who was going to take over, who was going to handle the uh, business of providing the food for their ritual. The one thing I was disappointed with the Mexican version is that they never really explained what or why there was a ritual. They never
Yeah.
really go into detail, as opposed to the American version, where of course they bogged down the film with this backwoods country tale of them coming off the Mayflower. That's just a joke, but with them coming out and couldn't find food, and they're survivalists, so they started eating people, and that's how come it became part of their religion or culture, whatever you want to call it. Um, and it doesn't explain either film. Neither explained, was this a yearly tradition? Is this
Yeah.
something that they did quite often? I know at one point the American version gave us a slight body count, like there were 200 and something women that were people that were missing within a 10-mile
Oh, I
radius of
missed
the,
that.
the area. So yeah, so there was a body count, but I'm like, well, if they've been doing this every year, that would probably add up to a few hundred, a couple, maybe not a couple hundred, because yeah, the girls were teenagers, so maybe a couple hundred people. So
Oh,
maybe
a
it's
few
a yearly thing,
generations.
but yeah. So who knows? But yeah, again, I thought the Spanish version or the Mexican version was well done. I liked the fact that they it got to the point where they lost control of the situation, and the
Hmm.
people in the community stood up for themselves finally. Whereas in this remake, the American remake, it was more of an internal struggle that resulted
Hmm.
in the conclusion that I kind of felt was it was passe.
Yeah.
So definitely didn't like the American remake. I thought the American remake could have given itself its own title. It didn't need to
Yeah.
try to play off of the title of the Mexican film as a remake.
I agree. Yeah. Well, those are our bottom three of the worst remakes, or our top three of the worst remakes. So let's
Hmm.
go ahead and go on a cheerier side and do our top three of the best remakes. Do you want to start this time?
I'll let you take it.
Okay. So my number three, I'm gonna go ahead and switch these around a little bit, is Record and Quarantine. Listening to you, I do agree a little bit more about it not being my number one. It was my number one, but I did forget how much less of a shaky camera the original was, the original Spanish version, and I did enjoy that. But I did think that these movies were very good. They had, like you said, almost shot for shot the same movie going on, which I thought was both were really interesting movies and both were well done. I personally liked both the characters of the leads, but I did think that with Record following a television reporter and the cameraman as they shadow emergency workers into a dark apartment building that is quickly locked inside and something terrifying. This movie was extremely well done as a new take on infected zombies in the genre at that time. It was fast paced. I thought that both movies followed good characters and had a good group of characters throughout the whole movie for being in one space the whole time of this
Hmm.
apartment building. I will say I thought that the ending, and this is a spoiler for both endings, I thought that having two different endings of the original being a possession of a demonic spirit and the remake being a scientific experiment gone wrong, I thought that that was really well done and really good choices for the audience that they were going for, because obviously
Mhm.
more in like the Spanish European South American audience, demonic possession, devil versus good is more of a trope and more of a theme seen throughout horror movies.
Mhm.
Versus American movies, you have things like Resident Evil and 28 Days Later, where we typically go more of the scientific route, creating zombies that way. I thought that that was a good way of changing the movie just enough that it fit the audience that it was going for. So personally, I thought they were both really good. I do agree with the shaky cam now that I think about it over again. Um, but I did like it. I do like Rec 2 more than I like Quarantine 2. So the Rec series in and of itself is better in general, but I did think that this one was a good remake that held its own.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And now that you mention it, you're right. As far as that was one aspect I forgot about. Whereas the Spanish version, the reporters followed them into it, so it was happening in real time, so to speak. Whereas the remake was found footage.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I prefer the going in live and getting caught locked in the building. I preferred that aspect. To
I
me, that
did
was
too.
a little more creepy than oh, we found some footage again.
Yeah, which was such a tired trope already at the point that this movie came out.
Yep.
But what is your number three of your best list?
Okay, so my number three is actually 2009's The Uninvited, which is
So
a
good.
remake of the 2003 South Korean film A Tale of Two Sisters. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the story, it's basically about a father and two daughters who are living together, and the mother dies, and there's a nurse who suddenly becomes part of the relationship with the father, and the daughters aren't happy about it. And one daughter is recently released from a mental institute, so the story, not giving away too much, is basically revolves around one of the daughters trying to readjust coming home from the mental institute. I thought the remake was filmed really well because I think for me and for most audiences, I just this is just my opinion, but it did a very good job of keeping you deceived until the very end.
Yeah.
And when I say deceived, it's just they don't let in on what's actually happening until the end. And I thought they did a really good job with that. I felt the South Korean film did as well. So for me, as an American remake, I thought for sure they would find some way to excuse me mess it up, but they didn't. They did a really good job at it. So I definitely enjoyed watching this. I've actually seen it a few times. It's something that, I do enjoy watching every now and then when I come across it. So that's my
Yeah.
number three.
Good choice. The American one I remember was like one of my favorite movies growing up. Thought it was so good. And I was so shocked by the ending. But my number two is actually a recent release, Speak No Evil from 2024 with James McAvoy, which is the remake of a Danish Norwegian film from 2022. I thought that this movie, if you saw our last week's video, you'll kind of understand my feelings towards it. But I thought that this movie was really good. Both movies held their own in really good places. However, I thought that the American version did a better job at pacing, and personally, I thought it did a better job at pacing the full storyline and adding to the character development of the American characters, as well as a little bit with the British characters. I thought that they added more to the wife storyline in this one, in this original or in the remake, um, as well as adding more for the son to do versus the original, where the son and the wife of the couple who invite the family over felt just like extra pieces to the story. They did not feel like they were characters in the movie at all. It focused mainly on the husbands, which was fine, but I really did enjoy getting to know the other characters in this remake. The endings, I thought both have their merits. I think depending on what kind of person you are, what kind of ending you enjoy in a horror movie, will tell you which one you prefer. But I think that both movies did a really great job. But I did kind of like the remake a little bit more just for pacing's sake and for character's sake. But the ending was a little cliche.
Good choice. Good choice.
What about
And I say
you?
good. I say good choice because that's also my number two. So again, I totally agree with everything you said. Speak 2004, 2024, No Evil, which, as you said, is a remake of a Danish film from 2022. I am tongue tied today.
We've been filming way too long.
And as you said, although the climax and the conclusion are totally different from the Danish version, I still think it's a good movie. Unfortunately, the remake reverts to using the typical cliche-ish horror movie. The victim fights back and panders to the need for a happy ending, as opposed to the original. But like you said, some people prefer different endings. I think this ending works as well. It's definitely probably what everyone wanted when they saw the original, Speak No Evil. So I think the directors kind of just gave us what we wanted and said, here's both versions.
Yeah. Well, going to our number one spot. My number one spot was actually a movie called Goodnight Mommy from 2022, which is a remake of the original Austrian movie from 2014 of the same name. This one I genuinely really enjoyed. I enjoyed both movies, but I thought the American remake was actually a lot better and a lot stronger than the original. The original I always thought was such a good movie. It follows two twin boys as their mother comes home from reconstructive facial surgery, and it's kind of moodier than normal. So both boys start to believe that possibly their mother has been replaced with someone else. This movie has such a good twist at the end. I don't want to give it away, but I thought that they did a really good job of never really showing or revealing, kind of like what you said with Uninvited. They do a good job of kind of deceiving the audience in a way. But the remake of this movie, which is the same exact storyline, I thought did a much better job of showcasing the mother before the surgery and how her personality changed so drastically and why the boys would feel that this is maybe a different type of person. Because in the original, you don't really feel that. In the original, you get hints of maybe she was a good mom before, but she kind of just seems rude the whole time and very mean and very abusive. But the remake really does showcase the original mother versus how she is after she's had this plastic surgery done, as well as exploring the boys in more of an aspect of wanting to escape the situation versus the original, which is much more of let's torture our mother until we find out where our real mother is. So I thought that that was a better aspect of it, of them trying to just escape the situation, but sadly being unable to, and how it pushes them to the point where they are torturing the mother a little bit more. I thought the original was just much better. Um, but both are good movies. Both are really good. I think both are worth watching if you get the chance to. But the original is better paced, or sorry, the remake is better paced and but more sympathetic towards all the characters versus their original Austrian version. But that's my number one. I really did like Goodnight Mommy. What about you?
Good choice. Good choice. Yeah, I enjoyed that one as well. Like you said, like The Uninvited, it definitely did a great job at deceiving the audience, keeping us in the dark until the very end. So I know some people will watch these films and be like, I knew it in the first 5 minutes, but
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Tell me anything. But anyway, I digress. So for me, my number one is the 2010 film Let Me In, which is a remake of the Swedish
Okay.
2008 film Let the Right One In. I felt the remake of this film, Let the Right One In, was spot on as a remake.
Hmm.
The storyline was kept intact, and the remake was able to elaborate a little more on some of the characters from the original. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the film, Let Me In is about a, yeah, well, I won't say young, she's not young, but it's about a vampire. And she's still she's still in the state of being a 12-year-old, but of course she's lived for a while, and she's protected by and helped by, I don't know what word you would use, a handler or a person who takes care of her needs during the day. So she winds up moving into a building complex, and things eventually happen where she meets a young boy, and this young boy, unfortunately, is being bullied and tortured at school. So he's kind of in his own shell, and they grow a liking to each other. And it's basically about the relationship between her and the young boy, and um, and him coming to grasp with not only her situation but his own situation. I thought the story, both the Swedish and the American version, were well done, um, and told a very good story. For anyone who's ever been bullied as a child, I think they would relate to, you know, what was going on with the young boy, and to throw the whole vampire thing in there. You know, I know it kind of seems kind of odd, but it brought some humility to the vampire character. That not all
Mhm.
vampires are just blood sucking monsters, that they actually, some don't, may not want to be in the situation that they're in, but they are. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed both of these, and rewatching both recently, I still enjoy them. So that's my top pick.
That's a great choice. I think your topics are perfect.
Yeah, you too.
Honestly,
You
mine might
too.
have changed if I had seen different movies. Was able to catch different movies that I didn't get a chance to watch.
Well, I will say though, having remembered a lot of the films like Ringu and The Grudge and Dark Water, a lot of the Japanese films I originally did not like. I mean,
Yeah.
I and it wasn't for the fact that I didn't like the story. It's just a lot of them dragged. A lot of them were
Hmm.
very slow. How about
Yeah,
you?
I agree. No, I agree. The Asian movies, like we said a little earlier, they focus a lot more on the storyline and the
Mhm.
mythos of the ghost and the why the ghosts are doing what they're doing. Um, so it's a lot slower paced than most American horror movies. I realize I do like Spanish movies a lot, though. Watching some of these,
Mhm.
I do enjoy Spanish movies a lot. I knew that kind of going into it because I liked a lot of Mexican horror movies. But I think that they just know pacing really well as storyline without relying too heavily on jump scares that American movies do focus on. And
Mhm.
it has also shown me that American movies versus European movies aren't scared to go gruesome and dark, and American movies are much more reliant on happier endings. Is what I've realized watching all these remakes. Just how different countries and different cultures approach horror movies has been really interesting. And so I
Mhm.
would be interested in doing this again the opposite way of foreign remakes of American movies. I just don't know how many there actually are to do that.
Yeah, that would take some digging. But
But
no, I was
that
just going to say I agree that yeah, when it comes to some foreign films, there are darker endings, and as opposed to the U.S. remakes. However, there have been a couple that were remakes and they kept the dark ending, like
mhm.
Funny Games. So
Oh, so good.
there are films like that that aren't afraid to stir the audience a little bit. So let's hope that if there are any future remakes to come, that they will be as good as Speak No Evil and others that we enjoy.
Yeah. Like I guess we will see what the future has for us coming into the Halloween season and looking at movies like Nosferatu, which is slightly a remake of a long-standing horror
German
storyline.
film. Hmm.
German film. Where what's the other one? Wolfman, which is also a remake
Hmm.
of the classic stories. So we will see what it all
That we
has in store
think.
for us. That we think. We think. Well, it's made by the same person who made Invisible Man. So I'm assuming it's going under that trope, but in a very new way. So
Okay.
we will see
Okay.
what it holds for us. Hopefully, one of these movies will scare us. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you guys enjoy. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please give us a subscribe and put down in the comments any movies that we may have missed or that you enjoy or disliked that were remade. Thank you.
Thank you.